Sarah Hartwell heard her mother's voice through the kitchen wall, bright rehearsed, aimed like a rifle at Jacob Thornton the moment he stepped into the yard. She didn't move. Flour on her hands, bread on the table, the same invisible corner she had occupied her entire life. Then boots on the porch. A knock that wasn't for her. Her mother's careful laugh. And then silence. Followed by a voice she didn't recognize asking one question that stopped the whole morning cold. Who is the woman in the kitchen? Not Lily. Not the beautiful one. Her. If this story just stopped, you subscribe to our channel right now. Hit that bell and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far one woman's story can travel. Now let's go back to the morning everything changed. Eleanor Hartwell had been preparing for Jacob Thornton's arrival for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, she had done what she always did when something important was approaching. She had made Lily the center of every plan, and made Sarah disappear from every calculation so smoothly and so completely that Sarah herself had almost stopped noticing it was happening. Almost. She noticed on the morning he was due when her mother came into the kitchen before sunrise and said without preamble, without apology, "Stay in the back today. Don't come to the front of the house. Don't come out to the yard." And then walked back out before Sarah could answer, as if the instructions were so obvious they barely required delivery. Sarah had been up since 4. She had fixed the wheel on Clem Hadley's supply cart in the dark with a lantern and a set of tools she knew by feel. She had repacked 3 fence posts on the north side of the property that had rotted through the base and would have gone over in the next hard wind. She had carried 2 crates of dry goods into the storeroom, refilled the water troughs and started the bread before the sun was fully up. Her left hip was giving her the deep bone ache that came with cold mornings, and too much lifting the one that lived in her like an old debt that never fully cleared. The birthmark on her jaw and throat, dark reddish-brown, impossible to hide, impossible for most people to look at without looking immediately away, was the same as it always was. She was the same as she always was. She pressed her knuckles into the dough and said nothing. She had been saying nothing her whole life in the particular way of women who are never listened to. Not with silence born of weakness, but with the inward running speech of someone who had long ago redirected her voice to the only audience that never flinched, which was herself. She talked herself through problems. She talked herself through winters. She talked herself through the specific loneliness of being the daughter her mother presented. Last explained least and hoped for, not at all. Because all the hope in the Hartwell household had been poured into Lily for so long that there wasn't any left over, and Sarah had made her peace with that the way you make your peace with weather. You don't argue with it. You dress for it, and you keep moving. Jacob Thornton was coming because the family needed saving. The trading post was 3 bad seasons from collapse. The debt to Alderman Briggs and Casper was real and growing, and Eleanor Hartwell had exactly one asset she believed in, and that asset had golden hair and a smile that could stop a man on a busy street. Lily knew she was the plan. She had always known. She performed it with a fluency that was almost admirable. The precise warmth, the practiced laugh, the particular angle of her chin that caught light the way a coin catches light when you want someone to notice it. Sarah had watched her sister perform this for years and felt not bitterness, not exactly, but the close cousin of it, the feeling of watching a game being played for stakes that include you, but that you have never once been asked to play. She heard the horse before she heard any voices. One rider. Coming at an easy pace, not hurried. She felt her hands slow in the dough without deciding to slow them. She stood still and listened. Her mother's voice on the porch went up that particular note Eleanor hit when she was performing graciousness for a man she needed something from bright and open and slightly too musical. Lily's voice underneath it, lower, warm, perfectly calibrated. The sounds of the family's best self being assembled on the porch for an audience of 1. Sarah turned to the window. She told herself she was checking the light. She told herself she wasn't looking. She looked. He was already off his horse. Already still in the way of men who have spent enough time in difficult country to stop wasting motion. He was listening to her mother with his hat in both hands, and his eyes even from this distance, even through wavy kitchen glass moving. Not fixed on Lily the way every other man's eyes fixed on Lily. Moving. Taking in the yard. The fence line. The storeroom door. The repaired cartwheel sitting against the post where Clem had left it. He looked at the wheel for a moment longer than anything else. Then he looked at the kitchen window. Sarah stepped back from the glass. Her heart was doing something she didn't give it permission to do, and she told it firmly to stop. She went back to the bread. She worked the dough with the focused, deliberate energy she applied to everything that needed doing. No wasted motion. No sentiment. Just the work itself, because the work was always there and the work never disappointed her by being something other than what it was. She did not hear him cross the yard. She did not hear him come up the side of the house. What she heard was the kitchen door, the hinges she'd been meaning to oil for a week, announcing him with a long groan that she felt in her back teeth. She turned. He was in the doorway, hat in both hands, eyes on her face, not scanning, not flinching, not performing the elaborate, careful not to stare that people performed around the birthmark. Just looking at her the way you look at something you're genuinely trying to understand. "You're the one who fixed Hadley's wheel," he said. Sarah's hands went still. "How do you know that?" "Rode in from the north. Passed him on the road. He was still talking about it 20 minutes later." He stepped fully inside, and the kitchen felt different with him in it. Not smaller exactly, but differently weighted. Said a woman at the Hartwell place fixed his wheel in the dark at 4 in the morning and saved his contract. He didn't need to tell the whole territory. Grateful men talk. Can't hold it against them. His eyes moved briefly to the dough, to her flour-covered hands, to the organized row of tin canisters on the shelf above the work table. Then back to her face. "Your name is Sarah." It was not a question. Her mother must have said it outside, probably by accident, probably in the context of explaining that Sarah was not the relevant daughter. "It is," she said. "Jacob Thornton. I know who you are." "Then you know why I came." She held his gaze. She had a rule about that, about not looking away first, that she had made for herself in her 18th year and kept ever since. "You came for Lily," she said. "I came to find a wife." He turned his hat once in his hands, a slow rotation that seemed like habit rather than nerves. "I didn't ride 3 days with the name already decided." Something moved in her chest that she did not examine. "My mother would tell you Lily is the better choice. Your mother has been telling me quite a lot since I stepped out of the saddle." The tone was not unkind, but it was direct, the directness of a man who filtered what he said through accuracy rather than diplomacy. "She's a thorough woman. She wants what's best. She wants what she thinks is best. Those aren't always the same." He looked at the fence line through the kitchen window. "The posts on the north side, you set those this morning. They needed doing. Stone-packed base, good depth. Those'll hold 10 years. He looked back at her. "How long have you been running the maintenance on this property?" "I don't run anything. Things need doing, and I do them." "That's the same thing, Miss Hartwell." She pulled the dough once hard. "Mr. Thornton, what are you doing in my kitchen?" "Introducing myself." He said it simply, properly, without an audience managing the introduction. She looked at him for a long moment, the measuring look she had used all her life to find the distance between what people said and what they meant. The gap was usually wide enough to fall through. "You should go back to the porch," she said. "Lily is waiting. I expect she is." He didn't move. "Your sister is beautiful. Anyone with eyes can see that. Your mother has built a great deal on it. I understand why." He paused. "I'm also 34 years old, and I have seen what happens when a man chooses the thing everyone tells him to choose, without asking himself whether it's the thing he actually needs." He looked at her steadily. "I need a partner, not an ornament." The blood came up in her face not from pleasure, but from the collision of too many things at once. Disbelief. The specific ache of wanting something to be true so badly that believing it feels like a trap. The long-practiced reflex of a woman who has been set aside so many times that being chosen starts to feel more dangerous than being overlooked. "Those are fine words," she said. "They are. I mean them regardless." Meaning and living are different. They are, he agreed. That's why I'd like time to show you which one I'm doing. The door from the front room opened like a shot. Eleanor Hartwell came through it with the energy of a woman who has just realized a carefully constructed plan is being dismantled by someone who didn't receive the script. Her eyes went from Jacob to Sarah, to the flower on Sarah's hands, the stain on her apron, the birthmark, the loose hair, and whatever she was about to say rearranged itself into something more controlled. "Mr. Thornton," Eleanor said, "I'm not sure how you ended up in the kitchen. Lily is—" "I'd like to court Sarah," Jacob said. The silence was total. Even the sounds from outside seemed to stop. Eleanor's face did not fall apart. She was too practiced for that. But something behind it shifted some deep load-bearing certainty that had been standing so long she had stopped checking whether it was still sound. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked at her daughter, her older daughter, the one she had spent 26 years working around, working past working in spite of, and the look on her face was not cruelty. It was something almost worse than cruelty. Because it was genuine, she simply could not make the pieces fit. "You mean—" Eleanor started. "Sarah," Jacob said. "Yes. But Lily is—" Eleanor gestured toward the front room, toward everything Lily represented, toward the whole architecture of the plan. "Lily is— I can see that." Jacob's voice was even, patient, absolute. "I'd still like to court Sarah, with your permission." The front room door opened for the second time, and Lily walked through it. She had clearly been listening. She was too smart and too practiced not to have been listening. She came in with her chin up and her eyes bright and her smile in place, that perfect polished smile that Sarah had watched work on every man Lily had ever aimed it at. And she looked at Jacob Thornton with the full, deliberate impact of herself, and something happened that Sarah had never seen happen before in 26 years of watching men look at her sister. Nothing happened. He looked at Lily the way he had looked at the fence posts, with acknowledgement, with accuracy, without hunger. And then he looked back at Sarah. Lily's smile stayed exactly where it was, but her eyes shifted to her sister with an expression that moved through things too fast to name, before arriving somewhere that Sarah recognized because she had worn the same expression herself in reverse for most of her life. The expression of someone who had just discovered that the world does not organize itself the way they were told it would. "Mr. Thornton," Lily said. Her voice was flawless. "I think there may be some confusion." "No confusion, Miss Lily." A beat. "You came to call on our family." "I did. I've decided who I'd like to call on." He was not unkind. He was not apologetic either. He was simply a man who had made a decision based on the information available to him and was stating it clearly. "I hope that's not a difficulty." Lily turned to look at her sister. And this was the moment. This was the thing that Sarah would carry for years afterward. Not Jacob Thornton's words, not her mother's shock, but the look on Lily's face in that kitchen, stripped for just one instant of everything practiced and performed. Raw and young and genuinely bewildered. As if a rule she had never had to question had just been revoked without warning. "Sarah," Lily said. Just the name. Nothing attached to it. As if she were asking the name to explain itself. Sarah looked back at her sister and felt the full weight of what was happening. Not triumph, not even relief, but something heavier and more complicated. Guilt, maybe. Or the specific sorrow of a woman who has wanted something her whole life and finally gotten it in a way that requires someone else to lose it. "Lily," she said quietly, "why don't you give us a minute?" "I don't think—" "Please." Something crossed Lily's face. She looked at Jacob once more, a look that was different from any look Sarah had ever seen her give a man, because for the first time it was asking instead of offering. He didn't answer it. Not because he was cruel, but because the answer was already given. Lily walked out of the kitchen. Her steps were measured and even. The door closed behind her with a careful, deliberate click that was somehow worse than a slam. Eleanor stood for a moment longer. She looked at Jacob. She looked at Sarah. She pressed her lips together in the expression she used when she was accepting something she did not have the language to argue with, and then she walked out of the kitchen without a word, which was the loudest thing she could have done. The kitchen was just the two of them again. Sarah breathed out slowly. She looked at the dough on the table. She looked at Jacob Thornton, who was watching her with the same steady, unhurried attention as before, as if the last 5 minutes had confirmed something rather than complicated it. "That was hard for her," Sarah said. "I know. Lily has never—" She stopped, started again. "Men don't choose me over Lily. That doesn't happen. It happened today." She met his eyes. "Why?" she said. Not soft, not grateful, honest. The question she needed answered before she let herself feel anything. "I need the real reason, not the fine words." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man assembling a performance, but the quiet of a man who is looking for the accurate thing to say. "I watched you through the yard window for a few minutes before I came to the door," he said. "You were working. You never stopped working. You weren't performing anything for anyone. You were just doing what needed doing the way it needed to be done." He turned his hat in his hands. "I have 3 miles of fence that needs reposting. I have a cabin that needs a person who can look at a problem and fix it, rather than look at a problem and wait for someone else to fix it. I have a life in the mountains that is not romantic and not easy, and that will not become easier." He looked at her without apology. "I cannot promise you love. I want to be straight about that. I can promise respect, partnership, a man who sees the work you do and knows what it costs." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. She should have been hurt by the part about love. She told herself later that she should have been hurt. But in that moment, standing in her mother's kitchen with flour drying on her hands and her sister's careful footsteps fading down the hall, what she felt was not hurt. What she felt was the specific relief of being told the truth by someone who thought she was worth telling it to. "Take a walk with me," she said. "To the east fence. There's a cedar stand I sourced the timber from. You can see how I set the posts." He put on his hat. "I'd appreciate that." She untied her apron, hung it on the nail by the door, pushed a loose pin back into her hair with 2 fingers, and walked out of the kitchen and into the morning beside a man who had looked at everything this household had to offer and asked for the thing no one had ever thought to offer before. The walk was 20 minutes each way. He moved at her pace without adjusting it in any visible way, not slowing with the performance of accommodation, not pulling ahead and waiting, just walking beside her as if this were the natural speed of the world, and he had no argument with it. She noticed this without remarking on it. She filed it somewhere careful. He asked about the soil composition. She told him. He asked about the winter severity in this part of the territory and how it compared to what he'd seen near the Owl Creek Range. She told him that too, with the specificity of a woman who had spent years tracking what the cold did to timber and livestock and clay-packed ground. He listened with the real attention of someone who intended to use what they were hearing. "You know this land," he said. "I've had to." "That's not a criticism." "I know it isn't." She looked at him sideways. "Most men find it unusual. A woman who talks about soil drainage and timber grade. Most men," he said, "are looking for something different than what I'm looking for." She didn't answer that. But she felt it land somewhere it wasn't supposed to land in the part of her she had bricked up years ago and told herself was better that way. At the fence line he crouched and checked her postwork with his fingers pressing into the stone-packed base, testing the set. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. Not effusive, just accurate. The word landed clean. 3 miles of fence, she said. 3 miles. That's considerable work. It is. He stood, looked at the tree line, then at her. Would you consider coming to see it? She looked back at him steadily. That's a significant question for a first meeting. With proper company, your mother or someone else from the property. She was quiet for a moment. The spring light was thin and flat across the tree line, and her hip ached, and the bread was still on the table unfinished, and she had been careful her whole life, careful with hope, careful with expectation, careful to keep the walls solid between what she wanted and what she allowed herself to want. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. They turned back toward the house. Halfway across the yard, he stopped. She stopped beside him. He was looking at the trading post at the weathered siding, the inventory list tacked crookedly to the door frame, the back corner where two boards had separated and let in weather. "The post is struggling," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. He was not asking to be polite. "3 bad seasons," she said. "Debt to Alderman Briggs and Casper. The contract with Hadley is the only thing keeping us current. And if Hadley's contract falls through..." She had not said this out loud to anyone. She had carried it alone in the ledger reading hours before the rest of the house woke up. "Then we're finished," she said, "inside of a year." He was quiet. Then, "Does your mother know that?" "She knows there's debt. She doesn't know the number." "You haven't told her." "Telling her won't change it. Working might." She looked at him. "That's why I was up at 4 fixing Clem's wheel. Because if Hadley loses the Bakersfield contract, we lose Hadley. And if we lose Hadley..." She stopped. "I understand," he said. She believed him. That was the thing that was starting to frighten her. Not that he was saying things she wanted to hear, but that she was starting to believe he meant them. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "you should know something. I am not my sister. I cannot be my sister. I will not perform warmth I don't feel or gratitude I haven't earned or softness that isn't real. I am exactly what you have seen today. No better presentation is coming." He looked at her for a long moment. "Good," he said. That was all. They walked back to the house. Eleanor met them on the porch with the expression of a woman who had spent the past hour negotiating with herself and arrived at a ceasefire that was not a peace. She thanked Jacob Thornton for his visit with a courtesy so deliberate it was its own kind of message. He accepted it with an equivalent deliberateness. He said he hoped to return on Thursday. Eleanor said Thursday was acceptable. He put on his hat, mounted his horse, and rode north without looking back. Sarah stood on the porch and watched him go. "I don't understand it," Eleanor said. Sarah said nothing. He could have had Lily without a moment's difficulty. Every man who has ever come to this house... "I know, Mama." "What does he think?" Eleanor stopped, regrouped. "What does he want from you, Sarah, honestly? What could a man like that possibly want from me?" Sarah turned to look at her mother. She said it flatly, without anger, without wound. Just naming the thing that was underneath the sentence, Eleanor couldn't finish. "You can say it." Eleanor pressed her lips together. "He told me what he wants," Sarah said. "A partner, someone who can work." She looked back at the road where the dust from his horse had already begun to settle. "Maybe that's not romantic enough for you to understand, but it's more than anyone has ever offered me." She paused. "I'm going to finish the bread." She walked back into the kitchen. Her hands were steadier than she expected them to be. She worked the dough and tried to talk herself back into the careful distance she had kept for years, the managed, reasonable distance from hope that had kept her functional and intact through 26 years of being overlooked. She told herself it was too early. She told herself she didn't know him. She told herself that one morning and one honest conversation were not a foundation. All of that was true. She believed all of it. And still, when she heard the last of his horse's hooves fade out on the northern road, something in her chest that had been quiet for a very long time said without her permission. Thursday. Down the hall behind a closed door, Lily was silent. And in that silence, in the specific quality of it, the way it was. Not the silence of indifference, but of someone sitting very still with a feeling they hadn't expected to have. Sarah heard the first note of something that had not been present in this house before. Trouble. Not the trouble of debt or dying seasons or a trading post leaking money at every seam. A different kind of trouble. The kind that lived between people who loved each other and wanted incompatible things. The kind that didn't announce itself until it was already inside the walls. Sarah shaped the loaves, slid them into the oven, set the timer by the angle of the light. She stood at the work table and breathed steadily, and let herself think about Thursday for exactly 30 seconds. Then, she went back to work. Thursday came faster than Sarah expected, or maybe it came exactly on time, and she had simply stopped knowing how to wait for things. She told herself she had not been counting the days. She had been working the same work she always did, the same hours, the same sequence of tasks that held the Hartwell property together with the functional, unglamorous efficiency of a woman who had learned early that survival did not pause for feelings. She split wood. She went over the ledger twice. She patched the separation in the trading post siding with timber scraps and oil-tempered nails working from the outside in the cold morning air, while her mother watched from the window with an expression that had not yet decided what it was. She did not talk about Jacob Thornton. Neither did Eleanor. Lily was the loudest silence in the house, present at meals, present in the evenings, performing the ordinary motions of daily life with a precision that was so exact it was its own kind of statement. She passed the salt when asked. She answered questions. She smiled at the right moments. And she said nothing about the man who had come to the yard and looked past her as if she were furniture. That was worse, Sarah thought, than anger would have been. Anger she could have understood. Anger she could have responded to. This careful, flawless, deliberate nothing felt like a held breath, like a rope pulled taut and waiting. Wednesday night, Sarah lay awake and had the conversation with herself she had been postponing for 3 days. The honest one. The one that started with "You do not know this man. He was here for 2 hours and said things that sounded true, and you have built nothing on that, Sarah Hartwell. You have built nothing, and you will not build anything, yet. You will wait, and you will watch, and you will not let yourself want this so much that you lose your judgment over it. Because you have seen what wanting does to women in this territory. You have seen women choose hope over evidence and spend the rest of their lives paying for the difference. She told herself all of that. She believed it. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of the fence line at the cedar stand and the way he had said good when he pressed his hand into the stone-packed base of the post. Just that one word, like it mattered that she had done it right. He arrived Thursday at 9 in the morning, and he did not come alone. That was the first thing she noticed. The second horse, a sturdy roan mare, and the rider on it, a woman in her late 50s, with a straight back and a direct gaze that swept the Hartwell yard, the way experienced people sweep unfamiliar territory, cataloging rather than admiring. She was not soft-looking, and she was not decorative, and she climbed down from the roan with the ease of someone who had been doing it for 40 years. "That's Ruth Connolly," Jacob said when Sarah came out to the yard. He was already off his horse, hat in hand. The same as before, unhurried, direct, exactly what he'd been 2 days ago, without adjustment or performance. "She's got the property north of mine. Known her 12 years. She agreed to come along so this could be done properly." Ruth Connolly looked at Sarah with a sharp, assessing attention, and then stuck out her hand. "You're the one who fixed Clem Hadley's wheel," she said. Sarah shook it. "Word travels. In this territory, good work travels faster than bad news, which is saying something." Ruth looked at Jacob. "She's got a better handshake than you did when I met you." Jacob said nothing, which appeared to be a regular response to Ruth Connolly. Eleanor appeared on the porch. She had dressed carefully. Not for Sarah's caller, Sarah understood, but because Eleanor Hartwell would not allow any visitor to find her unprepared, regardless of how she felt about the visit. She looked at Ruth with the measuring attention of one capable woman, taking stock of another, and something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly toward respect before she could suppress it. "Mrs. Hartwell," Jacob said, "I hope Thursday morning is still acceptable." "It is," Eleanor said. Her voice was even. She had made some private accommodation in the past 3 days. Sarah could see it, the place where her mother had bent, rather than break. She had not accepted this, but she had decided to permit it, which was its own kind of decision. "Come inside." They came inside. Lily was in the front room. She rose when they entered, and she was, as she always was, as she could not help being beautiful. And the light from the east window found her as it always found her. And Ruth Connolly looked at her with a brief flicker of recognition at what she was seeing. And Jacob Thornton looked at her and looked away, in the same moment, with the easy finality of a man whose mind was already settled. Sarah watched Lily register that look. The looking away. The immediacy of it. The absence of hesitation. She watched something move through her sister's face, not a crack exactly, but a fine line in the surface of something that had always held. Lily sat back down. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the window. "I'd like to propose a visit to my property," Jacob said. He was speaking to Eleanor because that was the proper form, but his eyes moved to Sarah once, and she felt it the way you feel, a draft through a wall you thought was solid. With Mrs. Connolly present, Sarah would have a chance to see the land and the cabin. We would be back before dark. Eleanor sat with this for a moment. "That's a full day." "Yes, ma'am." "A great deal of time to spend with a man Sarah has met once." "It is." He didn't qualify, it didn't soften, it didn't perform reassurance. He simply agreed with the fact and waited. Eleanor looked at Ruth. "You'll be with them the full day?" "Every minute," Ruth said. "I've done this before for proper courting situations. You have my word, Mrs. Hartwell, and my word in this territory is worth something. Ask anyone in the Owl Creek Valley." Eleanor looked at Sarah. It was the longest look her mother had given her in years. Not the dismissive glance, not the managing look, but something that went deeper and asked a question Eleanor didn't know how to ask out loud. Sarah met it and waited. "Be back before dark," Eleanor said. The ride to Jacob Thornton's property took the better part of 2 hours. Ruth Connolly rode slightly behind and slightly to the side, near enough to fulfill her purpose, and far enough to allow a conversation that wasn't a performance. Sarah had not spent 2 hours on horseback in some time, and her hip let her know about it in steady, honest terms that she did her best to ignore. Jacob noticed. He didn't say anything about it, which was correct, but he set a pace that was easier than it needed to be, and she understood this was intentional without it being made into a moment. "How long have you had the property?" she asked. 6 years. Bought it from a man named Garrett, who decided the mountains weren't worth what they'd cost him. He wasn't wrong exactly. He just wasn't the right person for that land. "And you are?" "I think so. 6 years of evidence suggests it." She almost smiled. "The fence line, 3 miles of it. 3 miles and 2 sections that need full replacement, not just reposting. The winter took the north section worse than I anticipated." He looked at her. "I want you to see the scope of it, not to impress you with the difficulty, because you should know what the work actually is before you make any decisions about anything." She looked at him. "Most men don't show a woman the problems first. Most men are trying to sell something," he said. "I'm trying to find a partner. Those are different operations." Ruth Connolly made a sound behind them that might have been agreement or might have been a comment on both of them. Neither of them asked which. The cabin came into view after they crested a long rise, and Sarah did not let her face do anything with what she saw. It was small. Smaller than the Hartwell house, rougher, with a porch that sagged slightly on the left side, and a roof that had been patched in at least 3 places with timber that didn't quite match. A working property, no illusions. The kind of place built by a man who needed shelter first, and comfort later, and was still in the first conversation with the later part. But the structure was sound. She could see that the foundation worked the way the walls met the ground, the integrity of the main beam visible where the porch roof pulled slightly away. Someone who knew what they were doing had built this. The problems were age and weather, not incompetence. "The porch," she said. "Left post is sinking. I've been leveling it, but the ground underneath is soft. Needs a stone base." "Like the fence posts. Same principle." He dismounted and came to hold her horse while she got down, which he did without ceremony, or the slightly patronizing gentleness that made her feel like a problem to be managed. Just practical assistance offered and completed. She took it the same way. Ruth Connolly walked past them toward the porch and began examining it with her hands before anyone had said anything further. Jacob showed Sarah the cabin interior. It was spare a main room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping room, a back room that functioned as storage and secondary workspace. Everything was organized with the same no-wasted motion logic she used herself. Tools in their places, supplies stacked by category. The fireplace maintained. The floor swept. A man who lived alone, but lived with the habits of someone who expected the space to be functional rather than merely occupied. She looked at the shelving he had built along the east wall. Even and level the joints tight. The wood properly dried before it was worked so it wouldn't warp in the winter. She ran her fingers along one of the joints. "You built these yourself," she said. "Last winter. Long nights." "The joinery is good." "I had time to be careful." He watched her look at it. "What would you change?" She looked up. "About the shelving. About any of it." She looked around the room with the honest, systematic attention she used on problems she was actually going to solve. "The back room is undersized for the storage you're running. I can see from the supply line that you're rotating stock through the main room, and that's inefficient. If you extended the back wall 6 feet to the east, you could double the storage capacity and keep the main room clear." She looked at the fireplace. "The draw is good, but the hearth is too narrow for long-burning logs, which means you're managing the fire more than you should have to in winter. Wider hearth, deeper firebox, you're cutting your wood management time in half." She paused. "The porch post needs a stone sleeve around the base, not just under it. You're managing the symptom. The ground in that corner will keep shifting if you don't address the drainage." Jacob looked at her for a moment. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Go on." "I'm done." "You stopped because you thought you were saying too much." She looked at him steadily. "I was evaluating your home." "I asked you to." He turned his hat in his hands. "I wanted to hear it. I want to know how you see things." He paused. "No one has looked at this place and talked to me about it the way you just did. Not once in 6 years." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing which seemed to be acceptable. Ruth Connolly came in from the porch with dust on her hands and an expression that suggested she had made up her mind about several things. "The post is worse than it looks," she told Jacob. "You've got maybe one more season before that corner gives." She looked at Sarah. "You've been telling him what needs doing." "Some of it." Ruth looked at Jacob. "She's right about all of it, if that's what you're wondering." She pulled up the single chair in the room and sat in it without asking. "Now, since I'm here as a proper chaperone and not a fence inspector, perhaps someone would like to tell me what's actually happening between the two of you and save us all the time of pretending it isn't happening." Sarah looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at Sarah. Ruth Connolly looked at both of them with the placid, patient expression of a woman who had seen a great many things and was entirely comfortable waiting. "I want to court Sarah," Jacob said. "She hasn't agreed yet." "I said I'd think about it," Sarah said. "It's been 3 days." "I'm a thorough thinker." Ruth made a sound that was almost a laugh and converted itself at the last moment into something more respectable. "What's she thinking about specifically?" Ruth asked Jacob. "Do you know whether I mean what I say?" Ruth looked at Sarah. "And do you think he does?" Sarah looked at Jacob. He looked back at her without performing anything without reassurance or appeal or the particular careful attention men gave women they were trying to persuade. Just looking at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand accurately. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that he says what he means. I'm thinking about what that costs." Ruth considered this. That's a more honest answer than most women would give, and most men would know what to do with. She looked at Jacob. "She's asking whether being chosen by you is going to be worth the price of being passed over by everyone else." The room was quiet. Sarah felt the accurate unpleasantness of being understood precisely in front of someone she had just met. "Ruth," she said. "I'm not wrong," Ruth said without apology. "And you know I'm not wrong, which is why you're not saying I'm wrong." Jacob was still looking at Sarah. "What is the price?" he said. "Specifically, tell me what you're actually calculating." She met his eyes. "My mother will never fully accept this. My sister, I don't know yet what Lily will do, but I know she feels this as a thing done to her, not a thing that simply happened. The people in town who know this family will have opinions, and those opinions will not be kind. And you. She paused. You're a good man based on 2 days of evidence and the word of a woman I met this morning, and I don't think you're lying to me. But I don't know you, and putting my future in the hands of a man I don't know, based on the fact that he's the first man who ever looked at me directly is... She stopped. That's not a calculation. That's desperation dressed up as a decision. And I've promised myself I wouldn't do that. The room was very quiet. Jacob turned his hat once in his hands. That's a fair assessment, he said. I know it is. So what would make it a calculation instead? She looked at him. Time. More conversations like this one, where you don't perform anything, and neither do I. And at the end of it, I know whether the man I'm talking to is the same as the man who exists when no one is watching. Ruth made a small sound. It was the sound of a woman giving quiet approval without wanting to interrupt. That's reasonable, Jacob said. I can do that. He looked at her steadily. I'll come Tuesdays and Thursdays. We don't have to decide anything until you're ready, but I want you to know. He paused with the pause of a man choosing accuracy over smoothness. I'm not going to change my mind. You should factor that in. Something moved through her that she identified and dismissed in the same motion. She was good at that. She had been good at it for years. Tuesdays and Thursdays, she said. Yes. With Mrs. Connolly or someone comparable present. Every time. She looked at Ruth. Are you available Tuesdays? For this, Ruth said. Wouldn't miss it. They ate a midday meal that Jacob had prepared before they arrived. Practical food well made, nothing intended to impress, which impressed her more than anything elaborate would have. Ruth Connolly ate with the focused efficiency of a woman who treated a meal as fuel, and talked throughout it with the candor of someone who had decided long ago that life was too short for conversational maneuvering. She told Sarah about her own marriage, a man named Connolly, who had been dead 11 years, who had been difficult and decent, and the best partner she had ever had in the practical sense, who she still missed with the specific ache of missing something load-bearing. She talked about it without sentiment, but without pretense either. Just the truth of it. This was a life. It cost things. It gave things. You could not always tell in advance which things would be which. Sarah listened to her and thought, this is what a woman who has actually lived looks like. Not what she'd been told a successful woman looked like. The actual thing. On the ride back, the light was going thin and golden in that particular way of spring afternoons, when the sky can't decide whether it's still winter. Ruth had moved up to ride beside Sarah, while Jacob handled a section of the road that needed more attention. Sarah was aware of being assessed not unkindly, but thoroughly in the way Ruth appeared to do most things. You're afraid, Ruth said. Sarah looked at her. I'm careful. Those aren't the same, and you know it. Ruth rode easily, not looking at her. I'm not saying afraid is wrong. Fear of the wrong thing at the wrong time has saved more lives on this frontier than courage has. But fear of the right thing. She paused. That's just waste. You think he's the right thing. I think you're not asking the right question. Ruth looked at her now. You're asking whether to trust him. That's sensible. But the question underneath it is whether you trust yourself. Whether the thing inside you that said yes when you saw him, that you've been working very hard to argue with for 3 days, whether that thing has ever been wrong before. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. The road was uneven here, and her hip ached, and the afternoon was going sideways toward evening. It hasn't been tested before, she said finally. This hasn't happened before. Ruth nodded once. Then maybe, she said, the fear isn't about him at all. They arrived back at the Hartwell property 20 minutes before dark. Eleanor was on the porch. She looked at Sarah, the way she had looked at her on Thursday morning, that deep, uncertain look, the one that was trying to find a feeling it didn't have a name for. Jacob dismounted and spoke to Eleanor with courtesy, and with the same non-performing directness he gave everything, and Eleanor responded with the careful composure of a woman renegotiating her understanding of what was possible in her own household. He would come Tuesday. Eleanor said that was fine. He said goodnight to Sarah, just that goodnight, nothing freighted with more than it was, and rode back north with Ruth Connolly beside him. Sarah stood on the porch and watched them go, and did not think about Tuesday. She was done pretending she was not going to think about Tuesday the moment she went inside. But she stood on the porch and breathed the evening air, and let herself simply be a woman, standing at the edge of a decision she had not expected to be given the chance to make. Eleanor stood beside her. "Well," Eleanor said. "Well," Sarah said. "He's—" Eleanor started. Stopped. "He's serious." "Yes. About you." The word still had a slight quality of astonishment in it that Eleanor was clearly trying to remove. "Not as a practical measure. He's actually—" "Yes, Mama." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the astonishment was gone, and what replaced it was something quieter and less certain. "He sees something," she said. "Not an accusation, not entirely a question. That I haven't been—" She stopped again. Sarah looked at her mother. Eleanor Hartwell was not a woman who admitted fault in any direction that didn't cost her something significant, and Sarah could see the cost on her face right now, the price of seeing clearly what she had spent 26 years not seeing. "It's all right, Mama," Sarah said. "It isn't," Eleanor said. "But I don't know how to—" She pressed her lips together. "Go inside. It's cold." Sarah went inside. Lily was at the kitchen table. She was sitting with her hands around a cup of something warm, and she looked up when Sarah came in, and they looked at each other for a moment, across the kitchen, across the years, across everything that had happened, and everything that was still happening. "How was it?" Lily said. The question was so normal, so ordinary. So exactly the question a sister would ask another sister after a day out, and Sarah felt the ground shift slightly under the ordinary shape of it, because she could hear underneath the question all the things Lily wasn't asking. All the things Lily was sitting with behind those bright eyes and that composed, careful face. "Good," Sarah said. "It was a good day." Lily nodded. She looked back down at her cup. "His cabin needs work," she said. Sarah stopped. "How do you know about his cabin?" "Harold Briggs mentioned it in the letter. Mama showed me the letter." Lily looked up again. "I've known about Jacob Thornton for 3 weeks, Sarah. I've been—" She stopped. Her voice was exactly steady, which cost her something. "I had thought about it, what it might be like, becoming part of something that had a future." She looked down again. "I know that sounds—" "It doesn't sound like anything except honest," Sarah said. Lily looked up. And this was the thing. This was the crack in the surface that Sarah had been waiting for, not with satisfaction. Never with satisfaction, but with the dread of knowing it was coming. Lily's eyes were bright in the particular way that was not warmth, but unshed feeling. "I don't understand why he didn't choose me," Lily said. "I have been thinking about it for 3 days, and I don't understand it." Sarah sat down across from her. She thought about Jacob's words. "I need a partner, not a performance." And she thought about her sister's face in the kitchen when he looked away from her, and she thought about what Ruth Connolly had said about fear. "He's not looking for the same thing other men look for," Sarah said. "That's not an answer." "No," Sarah agreed. "It isn't." She looked at her sister. "Lily, are you angry at me?" Lily looked at her for a long moment. "I'm trying not to be," she said, which was the most honest thing Lily had said to her in years, possibly ever. "It isn't your fault. I know it isn't your fault, but I keep—" She pressed her hand flat on the table. "I keep waiting for it to make sense, and it doesn't make sense. And that's the part I can't—" "Sit with," Sarah said. "Yes." Sarah looked at her sister's hand on the table. Lily's hands were smooth, unmarked by the kind of work Sarah's hands showed. They were beautiful hands. Everything about Lily was beautiful, and Sarah had spent her whole life next to that beauty, understanding herself in relation to it, in contrast to it, in the shadow of it. "I don't know how to explain a man who isn't like other men," she said. "I'm still figuring out what he is." She paused. "But Lily, there will be other men. Men who want exactly what you are. Men who will see you and not need a single explanation. Lily looked at her. You don't know that. I do, Sarah said. And she meant it. She meant it the way she meant few things absolutely from the bone. I have never doubted for a single day that men would want you. That has never once been the question. Something moved through Lily's face. Not quite softening, not yet. But the fine line in the surface did not crack further. They sat in the kitchen together for a while, the two of them with the cup of something warm between Lily's hands and the cold of the evening pressing against the window, and they did not fix anything. But they sat together, which was something. Which was more than the brittle, careful nothing of the past 3 days. It was almost enough. Then the front door opened. Neither of them had heard a horse. Neither of them had heard footsteps on the porch. But the door opened and Eleanor came through from the front of the house with a letter in her hand and a look on her face that Sarah recognized immediately and felt in her stomach before she knew why. It was the ledger look. The real number look. The look Eleanor only got when reality had presented itself in writing and could no longer be managed into a more comfortable shape. This came this afternoon, Eleanor said. She held the letter out. Sarah took it. She read it. She read it again. Alderman Briggs and Casper. The debt. The payment schedule Eleanor had negotiated 6 months ago. There was a new clause, or rather, there was a revelation that a clause had existed all along, that Eleanor had apparently not read carefully enough, or had chosen not to read carefully enough, and that clause stated plainly that in the event of payment falling more than 60 days behind the scheduled timeline, which they now were by 11 days, and counting, Briggs had the right to call the full balance due within 90 days. The full balance. Not the monthly installment. The full remaining balance of a debt that would take the trading post the property and everything on it to cover and would still leave them short. 90 days. Sarah set the letter on the table. She looked at it. She thought about the ledger she had been reading every week for 6 months and the numbers she had been watching with the careful private dread of someone watching a crack in a dam. She had known this was coming. She had not known it had a date yet. Now it did. Lily looked at her. Sarah, what does it say? Sarah looked up at her mother, then at her sister, then at the letter on the table. She thought about Jacob Thornton riding north in the thin spring light with 3 miles of fence that needed reposting and a cabin porch that was sinking into soft ground. She thought about Tuesday. It says, Sarah said quietly, that we have 90 days to save this family. And the silence that followed was not the silence of a problem they hadn't seen coming. It was the silence of a problem that had finally arrived at their door with a schedule. 90 days was not enough time to save anything. Sarah knew that before she finished reading the letter a second time. She knew it the way she knew the weight of the debt in the ledger, not as an opinion, not as a feeling, but as arithmetic. Cold, indifferent, accurate arithmetic that did not care what it cost the people it described. She folded the letter. She set it on the table. She looked at her mother and said, Did you read the full agreement when you signed it? Eleanor's chin came up. I understood the terms. The clause on page 3, the acceleration clause. Did you read it? Eleanor said nothing, which was its own answer. Sarah did not say what she wanted to say. She had learned a long time ago that saying the thing you want to say in the moment you want to say it was a luxury that people in genuine trouble could not afford. Instead, she said, All right, here is where we are. The balance is $460. We have 90 days. The post brings in roughly $40 a month in good conditions. We are not in good conditions. She looked at Lily, then back at her mother. We cannot trade our way out of this in 90 days. Then what do we do? Lily said. I don't know yet. I'm going to think about it tonight and I'll know more in the morning. Sarah stood. She picked up the letter. Don't tell anyone about this. Not the neighbors, not Clem Hadley, not anyone. When news like this gets out, it changes how people do business with you, and we cannot afford for people to change how they do business with us right now. Eleanor nodded tightly. Lily looked at the table. Sarah went to the back room where the ledger lived on the shelf above the small writing desk she had claimed as her own years ago, and she sat down with a lamp and a piece of paper and began to do what she always did when the world presented a problem that did not have a comfortable answer. She worked the numbers until they told her something true. They told her something true at 10:30 at night, and she sat with it for a while in the quiet of the house, and then she blew out the lamp and went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about Jacob Thornton, not about what he could do for her. She was careful about that, careful not to let the calculation run in that direction, because that direction had a name, and the name was desperation, and she had promised herself. But she thought about what he had said. I cannot promise love, only respect and partnership. She thought about the 3 miles of fence and the cabin with the sinking porch and the back room that needed 6 feet added to the east. She thought about what a partnership actually looked like when it was built on accurate information rather than hope. She thought about Tuesday. Tuesday arrived with a sky the color of pewter and a wind off the mountains that had real cold still in it, despite the calendar's insistence that it was spring. Jacob came at 9 as before, with Ruth Connolly on the roan beside him, and Sarah was waiting on the porch with her coat on and the letter from Alderman Briggs in her inside pocket. He looked at her face when he dismounted, and something in his own face changed, not dramatically, not with the performed concern of a man trying to appear sensitive, but the way a man changes who is reading a situation accurately. Something happened, he said. Yes. She looked at Ruth. Good morning, Mrs. Connolly. It's cold and the coffee I made this morning was terrible, Ruth said, getting down from the roan. Other than that, good morning. Come inside, Sarah said. She showed Jacob the letter at the kitchen table. She set it in front of him and let him read it without narrating it because he was not a man who needed information managed for him. He read it once. He read it again. He set it down and looked at it for a moment, and the look on his face was the same look she had seen him give the fence posts, not alarmed, not dismissive, but taking the measure of a real problem with real intention to address it. $460, he said. Remaining balance, yes. 90 days. From when the letter was sent. We have about 83 now. Ruth, who had read the letter over Jacob's shoulder without asking permission, sat down across from Sarah. What does the post bring in? $40 in a good month. This month will not be a good month. The Hendersons stopped buying on account 2 weeks ago. I think they heard something about the debt situation, which means the information is already moving. Sarah kept her voice even. She had practiced this in the back room last night, the factual delivery, the absence of panic, because panic in the person who understood the numbers best was the most expensive luxury of all. Best case $35 a month. 83 days is less than 3 months. We can bring in maybe $100 through the post before the deadline. 360 short, Jacob said. Yes. The kitchen was quiet. Eleanor had taken herself to the front room, which Sarah understood was her mother's way of being present without being in the conversation. A form of dignity preservation that Sarah did not begrudge her. Lily had gone out to the yard, which told Sarah more about Lily's current state than anything Lily had said in the past week. I have money, Jacob said. Sarah looked at him. No. Sarah, no. She said it without heat but without movement either. I am not going to let you pay my family's debt. That is not a partnership. That is a rescue. And I did not ask to be rescued, and if that's what this is. She stopped, steadied. If the only reason you're sitting at this table is because you think I need saving, then we have both been misunderstanding each other. Jacob looked at her for a long moment. That's not why I'm sitting at this table. Then don't offer me money. I wasn't offering you money. He held her gaze steady without apology. I was stating a fact, that I have resources, the same way you stated the fact about the Post's monthly income. It's information, not a solution. Ruth Connolly was watching the two of them with the expression of someone watching a chess game, where both players were better than average. She said nothing. Sarah breathed out. I'm sorry, she said. She stopped. She was not accustomed to apologizing, not because she was proud, but because she was rarely wrong about the things she said, and the sensation of having been too quick, too defensive, too ready to fight something that hadn't been an attack, it sat on her uncomfortably. "I'm listening," she said. "Tell me what you're thinking." He told her. He had been thinking about it since he rode away Thursday evening, he said. Not about the debt specifically, he hadn't known about the debt, but about the trading post itself. About what it was and what it could be. He had been watching the commerce patterns in this part of the territory for 6 years, and the Hartwell post was positioned better than it operated. The road through this property was the most direct route between two supply points that were growing. The problem was not location. The problem was capitalization and management. If someone invested properly in the inventory and the operation, the post could bring in 3 times what it currently did. Maybe more. Sarah listened to him describe this and felt a strange doubling, because she had thought all of this, or versions of it in the ledger hours, and the 4 a.m. working hours, had known it with the specific frustration of someone who can see a solution that requires a resource they don't have. She had never said it out loud to anyone, because there had been no point. "You've thought about the post," she said. "I've thought about this whole property," he said. "For 3 weeks, since Harold Briggs sent the letter." He met her eyes. "I know why Harold sent it. I asked him to look for a situation like this one. A property with potential that needed a different kind of management. I wasn't looking for a wife when I came here, Sarah. I was looking at a business arrangement. And then I got here and—" He paused with the pause of a man editing himself toward accuracy. "And I looked through the kitchen window and changed my mind about what I was doing here." The kitchen was very quiet. Ruth Connolly made a small sound that she converted at the last moment into a cough. "You came here for the post," Sarah said. Her voice was level. She was making herself keep it level. "Originally?" "Yes. And my mother doesn't know that. Harold told her it was a potential match, which it was, which it is." He turned his hat in his hands. "I'm not going to pretend those two things aren't tangled together. They are. But I want to be straight with you about which one I care about more." He looked at her directly. "The post is a good investment. Any one of 4 men I know would take it, but I'm sitting in this kitchen." Sarah looked at him for a long time. She was doing the calculation she had promised herself she would always do: the distance between what people said and what they meant. The gap, the place where intentions revealed themselves. She was looking for the gap. She could not find it. "What would you propose?" she said. He proposed it with the same practical clarity he brought to everything. A partnership in the post, genuine partnership, documented legal, not a favor, but a business arrangement. He would put in the capital needed to service the Briggs debt and properly stock the inventory. She would run the operation because she already was running it and was better at it than anyone he'd seen manage a post this size. The arrangement would be separate from whatever happened between them personally. If she decided she didn't want to continue the courtship, the business arrangement would stand on its own terms. If she decided she did, they would renegotiate based on whatever form the future took. "You're serious," Sarah said. "I am always serious." "That's—" She stopped. She thought about it from every angle she could see, looking for the place where it became a trap or a performance or a rescue disguised as a partnership. She couldn't find it. The terms were clean. The logic was sound. The fact that it solved her family's immediate crisis was real. But the solution was not charity. It was investment. It was exactly what she would have proposed herself if she'd had the capital. "I need to think about it," she said. "I know. I need to look at what a proper agreement would look like. The terms, the percentages, the decision-making structure. Write what you think is fair, and I'll read it." She blinked. "You'll take my terms." "I'll read your terms," he said, "and tell you if I think they're fair. That's how a negotiation between partners works." Ruth Connolly stood up from the table. "I'm going to go check on the mayor," she said to no one in particular, and walked out of the kitchen. Sarah and Jacob sat across from each other at the kitchen table, with the letter from Alderman Briggs between them and the lamp burning low, because neither of them had thought to turn it up, and the morning was gray outside. "Jacob," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. She saw him register it, barely just a slight change in the quality of his stillness, but she saw it. "If I agree to the business arrangement, that's separate from the other thing. You understand that. Completely. I'm not going to agree to court you because you're solving my family's problem. I won't do that." "I know. Because that's not a choice. That's a transaction. I know, Sarah." He said her name back to her with the same weight she had given his. "I'm not asking you to make any decision today. About anything. The business arrangement can be settled this week if you want it settled, because 83 days is not much runway, and I don't want your family to lose the property while we're being careful with each other." He paused. "The other thing can take as long as it takes." She looked at him. "You're very patient for a man who says he's certain." "Certainty doesn't require rushing," he said. "It just requires not giving up." She looked at the table. She looked at the letter. She thought about her mother in the front room, and Lily in the cold yard, and the ledger in the back room with its accurate, indifferent numbers. She thought about 83 days and $360, and what it meant to run out of both at the same time. Then she thought about something else entirely, something that had been sitting at the edge of her thinking all morning, and that she now brought to the center because it needed to be said. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Jacob waited. "Lily," she said, "my sister she's not handling this well. I don't mean that she's being cruel to me or making trouble. I mean, she's sitting with something that she doesn't have language for, and that's more dangerous than if she were angry. Angry people say things, and you can address what they say. People sitting quietly with something." She shook her head. "I don't know what she's going to do, and I think you should know that, because whatever happens between us is going to happen in a house where my sister is carrying something she hasn't put down yet." Jacob absorbed this without visible alarm. "Is she the kind of woman who acts on what she's carrying?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I've never seen her lose before." He nodded slowly. "All right." He didn't dismiss it, or minimize it, or tell her she was worrying unnecessarily. He just took it in as information and filed it where it belonged. "Thank you for telling me. For the honesty of that, the simple functional gratitude for being told a true thing, landed in her chest somewhere it wasn't supposed to land." She stood up. She went to the back room and came back with the ledger and set it on the table in front of him. "Read this," she said. "All of it. I want you to understand exactly what the situation is before you make any financial commitments. I don't want you to be surprised later." He pulled the ledger toward him and opened it. He read carefully the way he did everything, not fast, not slow, with full attention. Sarah made coffee. She made it the way she always made it, strong and without ceremony. And she set a cup beside him, and sat down with her own, and waited. He read for 20 minutes. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both about line items that deserved a question. She answered them precisely. He closed the ledger. "You've been managing this for how long?" he said. 3 years. "Alone?" "Yes." "And keeping the real numbers from your mother?" "Telling her the real numbers 3 years ago would have—" Sarah stopped. She would have made fear-based decisions. Sold things that didn't need to be sold. Cut supplies we needed to keep. The fear would have cost us more than the debt. She looked at her coffee. "I thought I could fix it before it reached this point. I was wrong about the timeline." "You weren't wrong about the management," Jacob said. "You stretched this further than most men I know could have." She looked up at him. "That's not flattery," he said. "That's an assessment. There's a difference." She knew there was. She knew the difference between being told something true and being told something designed to make her feel good. She had known the difference her whole life because nobody had spent much time on the second one with her. "I know," she said. The front door opened. Not the kitchen door, the front door, the one that faced the road. Both of them heard it. Sarah stood. Eleanor's voice from the front room. "May I help you?" A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Not rough exactly, but with an edge to it that carried even through walls. "Looking for the Hartwell property. I was told this was it. It is. Who's calling? Name's Garrett Briggs. I'm here on behalf of my father, Alderman Briggs of Casper. Sarah was through this kitchen door and into the front room before the name finished landing. Jacob was 2 steps behind her. The man standing into the Hartwell front doorway was perhaps 30, with the kind of good looks that announced themselves first and asked questions later. Well dressed for the territory, not frontier practical, but deliberately presentable, the clothes of a man who wanted to be read as prosperous. He was holding his hat and looking at Eleanor with the particular focused attention of someone who has come to deliver a message and wants to be sure the recipient understands the weight of it. His eyes moved to Sarah when she came through the kitchen door. They moved past her, the brief automatic dismissal she had been receiving from men her whole life, and then moved to Jacob behind her and stopped. Something changed in Garrett Briggs's face. A small recalculation. The kind of recalculation that happens when you arrive at a situation expecting one set of variables and find a different set. Miss Hartwell, he said to Eleanor, then corrected himself, looking between the women. Mrs. Hartwell. I'm Mrs. Hartwell, Eleanor said. Her voice was her best voice, composed, managed, giving away nothing. My daughter Sarah. Garrett Briggs looked at Sarah properly for the first time. The second look was different from the first, longer, more deliberate, with something in it she didn't immediately recognize, and then did. He was performing reassessment. He had dismissed her automatically, and was now unreading that assessment with the particular visible effort of a man who had just realized the woman he dismissed was the woman he needed to speak to. Miss Sarah, he said, I apologize for arriving unannounced. My father received your family's most recent payment and asked me to come discuss the account in person. Your father sent a letter, Sarah said. We received it. Yes. He smiled, and the smile was practiced, not Jacob's direct functional communication, but the smile of a man who had learned that smiling was a useful tool. He felt a personal conversation might be more productive than correspondence, given the situation. Given the situation, Sarah said, a personal conversation on behalf of your father regarding a financial matter should involve me since I manage the accounts, and any terms should be discussed with full documentation present. She looked at him steadily. Would you like to sit down, Mr. Briggs? He looked at her with an expression that had not expected this. He looked at Jacob. Is this our family, sir? No, Jacob said. He's a guest, Sarah said. A business associate. She met Jacob's eyes for 1 second barely and looked back at Garrett Briggs. Please, sit down. Sit. The conversation that followed was 20 minutes of careful, methodical territory being staked out by 2 people who were both smarter than the other had expected. Garrett Briggs had come prepared. He had figures. He had language. He had the particular smooth confidence of a man whose father's name opened doors in this part of the territory and who had learned to walk through those doors as if he'd built them himself. He laid out the situation with a precision that was not unkind, but was absolutely clear. The acceleration clause was binding, the timeline was firm, and his father was, he said, genuinely hoping for a resolution that didn't require legal enforcement. Sarah listened. She asked questions. She did not react to any of it with the fear or the visible distress that Garrett Briggs had almost certainly been counting on encountering. She took notes on the papers she had brought from the back room. She confirmed figures. She asked twice about specific clauses and made him show her the relevant sections in the copy of the agreement he had brought. Jacob sat to her left and said nothing. His presence was not performative. He was not puffing himself up or positioning himself as her defender. He was simply there in the room with the specific quality of solidity that she had noticed the first day, and that she was coming to understand was not a performance, but a feature. He was a man who was where he said he would be. That was all. It was more than she had expected from anyone. At the end of 20 minutes, Garrett Briggs sat back and looked at Sarah with an expression that had shifted considerably from the one he'd arrived with. You understand the situation clearly, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite respect, but was approaching it from the general direction. I do, Sarah said. I'll need 5 days to put together a formal response to the terms. I'd like to propose a structured settlement arrangement that addresses your father's legitimate concerns while preserving the operational capacity of the post. Garrett blinked. A structured settlement. Yes. The full balance in one payment in 80 days isn't in either party's interest if it collapses the operation that services the regional supply chain. Your father knows that. I'd like the chance to make that case formally. Garrett looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Jacob. Then he looked at Sarah again, and the recalculation in his face became something more complicated. 5 days, he said. 5 days. He stood. He put on his hat. He was doing something with his expression that Sarah couldn't immediately read too many layers, something she didn't have the information to decode yet. I'll tell my father to expect a response in 5 days, Miss Hartwell. He looked at her the way the second look had been, deliberately with attention. It was a pleasure to meet you. And you, Sarah said with exactly the warmth the situation required and no additional warmth at all. He left. The front door closed. Eleanor let out a breath that she had been managing for 20 minutes. Jacob sat forward in his chair and looked at Sarah. He'll be back, he said. I know. Not just about the debt. Sarah looked at him. She had seen it too. The thing in Garrett Briggs' face at the end. The shift that wasn't about money. I know, she said again. Ruth Connolly appeared in the kitchen doorway, having apparently returned from checking on the mare at some point during the preceding 20 minutes. I heard most of that through the kitchen door, she said without apology. The young Briggs has his father's instincts and his mother's vanity from what I've seen of him in Casper. That combination is useful in business and complicated everywhere else. Ruth, Jacob said. I'm just providing information, Ruth said serenely. Eleanor looked at Jacob. She looked at him the way she had not quite looked at him yet, directly, without the management layer, without the social form. You were going to offer to cover the balance, she said. I was going to discuss options, Jacob said. That's a yes. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands in her lap. Why, she said, not challenging. Genuinely asking. The question of a woman trying to understand something that was outside her model of how men behaved. Jacob looked at Eleanor with the same level direct attention he gave everyone. Because the post is a good investment, and Sarah is a good operator, and those two facts don't change because your family is in difficulty. He paused. And because I'd like your daughter to have the chance to make a decision about her life without a deadline making it for her. Eleanor sat with this for a long time, longer than was comfortable. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, I should have seen it years ago, what she was doing, what she was holding up. She looked at Sarah. I should have seen it. Sarah looked at her mother and felt the thing she had been carrying for 26 years shift, not lift, not disappear, but shift, like weight redistributed, like a load that was the same size but held differently. You see it now, she said. That's not enough, Eleanor said. No, Sarah agreed. But it's a start. The afternoon light was changing when Lily came back in from the yard. She came through the kitchen and stopped when she saw the group in the front room and read the quality of the silence the way the Hartwell women had always been able to read silences accurately without being told. Her eyes went from her mother to Jacob to Sarah, and she said, Something happened. Garrett Briggs came, Sarah said. Alderman's son. Lily's face changed. The debt. Yes. Lily looked at Jacob. She looked at him with the specific evaluating attention of a woman who has been thinking about a man for 3 days from the outside and is now trying to see him accurately. You're going to help us, she said. Not a question. We're working out the terms, Jacob said. Lily nodded slowly. She looked at Sarah. Something passed between them, the current that ran between sisters who had grown up in the same house and never fully said the important things to each other. And then Lily said, Is there anything I can do? It was the first time she had asked that. In 3 days of careful, composed distance, it was the first time she had turned toward instead of away. Sarah felt it land. She felt the cost of it for Lily, who had spent her whole life being the thing done for rather than the one doing. Yes, Sarah said. Come sit down. I need to write a response to Briggs by Thursday, and I need someone to check my language. I'm good with language, Lily said. I know you are. Lily sat down at the table. She pulled the paper toward her. She looked at Sarah's notes at the figures at the clause references. She picked up the pencil and said, Start from the beginning. Tell me what you're trying to argue. Sarah started from the beginning. She told Lily what she was trying to argue. And the two of them sat at the table in the changing afternoon light and worked. And Jacob Thornton watched the Hartwell sisters across the room with something in his face that was not quite readable and not quite hidden. And Ruth Connolly in the kitchen making coffee that was considerably better than the morning's batch allowed herself a small private expression of satisfaction that she would never have admitted to in front of anyone. It was not a resolution. It was not even close to a resolution. The debt was still real. The 90 days were still counting. Garrett Briggs would come back. Sarah knew this with the same certainty she knew the numbers in the ledger. And Jacob Thornton would come Tuesday and Thursday and keep coming steady and certain, and exactly what he said he was, and Sarah Hartwell would keep doing what she had always done, working the problem, holding the line, refusing to confuse desperation with decision. But at the table in the afternoon light with her sister's pencil moving across the paper, and the coffee smell coming from the kitchen, and Jacob Thornton sitting quietly in the chair by the window, she felt something she had not let herself feel in longer than she could name. Not safe, not finished, not even certain. Just not alone. And the difference between those two things, between the life she had been living and the life that was beginning quietly without announcement in the front room of a failing trading post on a cold spring afternoon in Wyoming territory, was larger than she had words for, larger than she had expected, larger, she thought, than she had ever let herself hope. The response to Alderman Briggs took Sarah and Lily 3 days to write. Not because the language was difficult. Sarah knew what she wanted to argue, and Lily had a genuine precision with words that Sarah had always known existed and never had occasion to use. It took 3 days because every time they got close to finished, Sarah found something else to check, another clause, to cross-reference another way the argument could be read that needed to be closed before it became a door. She was not stalling, she was being careful. She told herself that every morning and every evening, and mostly she believed it. The letter went out Thursday, with Clem Hadley's driver, addressed to Alderman Briggs personally, with a copy for Garrett. It proposed a structured repayment schedule, not 80 days, not the full balance at once, but a negotiated timeline with partial payments at specific intervals, backed by a documented increase in the post's inventory and operational capacity that would support the repayment without collapsing the business that made repayment possible. It was, Sarah thought, a reasonable argument made in clear language. Whether Alderman Briggs would find it reasonable was a different question, and one she could not answer until he answered it first. Jacob came Tuesday, as he had said he would, and Thursday, and the following Tuesday. Each visit was different in texture, but identical in structure. Ruth Connolly present, always the three of them talking the way people talk who are moving toward something without rushing toward it. He brought information about the supply route. He had been researching contacts in the Owl Creek Valley who moved goods through the territory and who might be persuaded to route through a properly stocked Hartwell post. He did not present these as gifts. He presented them as data laid out on the kitchen table, like survey maps, and he and Sarah worked through them together, the way she imagined people worked who had been doing this together for years. She noticed things. The way he never stated an opinion as a fact. The way he asked what she thought before offering what he thought. The way he was wrong sometimes twice that she could identify both times about matters of local supply and demand that she understood better than he did. And both times he said simply, "You're right, I was working from incomplete information," and moved on without defending the wrong thing. She had never seen a man do that before, not once, not in 26 years of watching men move through the world. It scared her more than anything else about him. On the second Thursday, walking back from the east fence, after checking a section of cedar that might supply a second phase of the post's expansion, she said, "You're doing it again." He looked at her. "Doing what?" "Being exactly what you said you were. Without variation. Without... She stopped. She looked for the word. Without slipping. Should I be slipping? He said. Everyone slips. Everyone has a version of themselves they present, and a version they actually are, and the distance between those two versions is what you find out about over time. You're not slipping. He walked beside her at her pace the way he always did. Maybe I just haven't been tested yet. Maybe. She looked at the road ahead of them. Or maybe you're the thing you appear to be, and I don't know what to do with that, because I've never encountered it before. He was quiet for a moment. What would you do with it? He said. If you decided that's what I was. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the same steady, unhurried attention, the same patience that was not passivity, but choice. A man who had decided that certain things were worth waiting for, and was simply waiting. I don't know yet, she said. I'm still counting. I know you are, he said. Take your time. She intended to. She genuinely intended to. And then Garrett Briggs came back. He arrived on a Friday 11 days after his first visit, and this time he did not wait at the front door. He rode into the yard while Sarah was outside checking the supply delivery from Clem's driver, and he dismounted in the yard with the ease of a man who has decided he is welcome whether or not he has been told so, and he looked at the operation. The stacked crates, the new inventory list Sarah had posted on the storeroom door, the patched siding that no longer let in weather, with an expression that moved through surprise before arriving at something more calculated. Miss Sarah, he said. She looked at him. Mr. Briggs, I wasn't expecting you. I was passing through. He looked at the storeroom door. You've made improvements. I make improvements continually. It's how I run things. She turned back to the delivery inventory and continued checking it against the list. Has your father received my letter? He has. Garrett walked closer, not to be intrusive, but to be in conversation range, which was a difference she noted. He asked me to convey his appreciation for the thorough response and his willingness to discuss the proposal. She looked up. Discuss. He has some modifications in mind. He can send them in writing. He thought a personal conversation would be more productive. Garrett said it with the same phrase his father used in the first letter, which told her the phrase was deliberate, possibly a signal, possibly just a habit. Miss Sarah, my father is not an unreasonable man. He has no interest in seizing this property. He has a great deal of interest in being repaid, and he has some interest in... He paused. He looked at the storeroom door again. In the future of this operation, Sarah set down the inventory list. She turned to face him fully. Mr. Briggs, tell me what your father actually wants, and we can stop spending time on the approach. Garrett looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression, the same recalculation she had seen the first day, but more deliberate now, like he had thought about it in the interval and arrived at a position. He wants the post, Garrett said, not to seize it, to invest in it, as a majority partner. The yard was very quiet. Clem's driver had finished unloading and was doing something with the cart harness that was taking a great deal of his careful attention. Majority partner, Sarah said. 60%. He provides the capital to clear the debt and restock the inventory. Your family retains 40% and the operational management. Garrett met her eyes. It's a fair offer, Miss Sarah. In his position, he could simply wait out the 90 days and take the whole thing. He could try, Sarah said. The legal process takes longer than 90 days, and we both know it. Garrett almost smiled. You've looked into that. I look into everything. She held his gaze. Mr. Briggs, your father's offer would make the Hartwells employees of their own post with a 40% share of the profits and no control over the decisions. That's not a partnership. That's a managed decline. Some people would say it's better than losing everything. Some people haven't read the clause on dissolution rights. She looked at him steadily. I have. If your father becomes majority partner, any decision about the future of the property requires his approval, including sale. Which means if this family ever wanted to exit, They'd need Alderman Briggs's permission to do it. That's not an investment. That's a leash. Garrett was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with an expression that had fully abandoned the automatic dismissal of the first day and arrived somewhere she still couldn't completely read. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I know," she said. "Tell your father I'll have a counter-proposal in writing by Monday. If he's willing to discuss terms where the Hartwells retain majority ownership, I'm willing to discuss investment structures. If he's not willing to discuss, that there's nothing to negotiate." Garrett nodded slowly. He turned his hat in his hands, the same gesture she noticed as Jacob's though on him. It meant something different. On Jacob, it was habit. On Garrett Briggs, it was the thing people do when they're thinking and don't want to show it. "Miss Sarah," he said, "can I ask you something that's not about the post?" She looked at him. "The man who was here last time," he said. "Thornton, what is he to you?" She held his gaze for a moment. "That's not your business, Mr. Briggs." "Maybe not." He put his hat back on. "But I intend to come back Monday for the counterproposal, and I'd like to know whether I'm negotiating with one party or two." She understood exactly what he was asking and what he was offering by asking it, and she felt the specific discomfort of a woman who has spent her whole life being invisible, now finding herself in the center of a competition she had not expected and was not sure she trusted. "You're negotiating with the Hartwells," she said. "Come Monday." He left. Sarah stood in the yard for a moment after the sound of his horse faded, and she thought about what had just happened and what it meant and what she was going to do about it. Then she picked up the inventory list and went back to work because the work was there and it needed doing, and the thinking could happen while her hands were busy. It always had. She told Jacob that Tuesday. She told him plainly, the way she told him everything: the offer, the majority partner clause, the dissolution rights, Garrett's question at the end. She laid it out on the kitchen table, like the ledger, all of it visible, none of it softened. Ruth Connolly sat to her right and listened with the focused attention of a woman filing information. Jacob listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "What did you say when he asked about me?" "I said it wasn't his business." "It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to counter with the same structure I proposed?" "I'm going to counter with majority ownership preserved, which is what your proposal gives us. And I'm going to give Alderman Briggs a better return on his investment than his majority offer would produce over 10 years, because I can demonstrate that with the current numbers and the supply route data you found." She met his eyes. "If he's a real investor and not just someone looking to acquire a property, he'll take it. If he's looking to acquire the property, he'll refuse, and then I'll know what I'm dealing with. And if he refuses..." She looked at the table. "Then we're back to 80 days and $460 and whatever decisions need to be made from that position." Jacob turned his hat in his hands. "My offer stands," he said. "Same terms I said before. Nothing has changed." "I know," she said. "I haven't forgotten. I just want to make sure you know it's still there," Ruth Connolly said to the air above the table. "Someone should also address the fact that Garrett Briggs is going to keep finding reasons to come back here regardless of how the financial negotiation ends, and that this creates a situation that someone should probably decide how to handle before it handles itself." Sarah looked at Ruth. Jacob looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at her coffee. "She's not wrong," Jacob said. "I know she's not wrong," Sarah said. "What are you going to do about it?" Sarah looked at him. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him for 3 weeks now, the way she had been counting and measuring and looking for the slip that had not come, looking for the gap between what he said and what he was, that had not appeared, that kept not appearing, no matter how many times she checked. She was tired of looking for it. She was tired of being careful in the direction of a man who had not once given her a reason to be careful. She was not made for hope. She had told herself that for years she was made for work and endurance and the honest management of what was real, and this was real. He was real. 3 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays and a kitchen table covered in ledger pages and supply route maps was real. "I'm going to stop taking so long," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. Ruth Connolly set down her coffee cup. Jacob Thornton looked at Sarah Hartwell and did not say anything immediately, which was how she knew it mattered to him, because he was always more careful with the things that mattered, always took the extra moment to make sure he was going to say the true thing rather than the convenient one. "What does that mean?" he said. "Specifically, it means—" She stopped. She had not done this before. She had never been the one to say the thing, never been in a position where there was a thing to say, and the unfamiliarity of it was considerable. But she had decided sitting in the yard after Garrett Briggs rode away that she was going to stop managing herself out of things she actually wanted. She had been managing herself out of wanting things for 26 years, and she was tired of it. "It means I've been deciding whether to trust you," she said, "and I've decided." He waited. "I trust you," she said, simply, without decoration, the way she did everything that mattered. Jacob Thornton breathed out once slow, like a man who has been holding something for a while and has been given permission to set it down. "All right," he said. His voice was different than usual, not softer exactly, but with something underneath it that hadn't been audible before. "Then I'd like to ask you something." "Ask? Not today," he said. "I want to do it right. Give me until Sunday." Ruth Connolly stood up with her coffee cup and walked out of the kitchen with the determined, deliberate energy of a woman who was leaving the room on purpose and wanted both parties to know it. Sunday came. He arrived in the morning with Ruth as always, but Ruth stayed on the porch this time, sitting in the chair Eleanor had put out and drinking the coffee Eleanor brought her with the easy familiarity of two women who had over the past 3 weeks developed a mutual respect that neither of them had announced. Jacob came inside. He stood in the front room with his hat in his hands, and he looked at Sarah and he said, "I'd like to speak to your mother first." Sarah looked at him. "All right," she said, and went to get Eleanor. She stood in the kitchen while her mother was in the front room with Jacob Thornton. She could hear the low register of his voice, but not the words. And she worked the bread dough the way she always worked it when she needed something to do with her hands. And she thought about all the distances she had traveled to get to this moment. The years of invisibility, the ledger hours, the 4 a.m. fence posts, the specific daily discipline of a woman who had made her peace with reasonable and was now being asked to unmake it. Eleanor came back into the kitchen. Her eyes were wet. Not crying Eleanor Hartwell did not cry in front of people, but wet in the contained, determined way of a woman holding something larger than she expected to be holding. She looked at Sarah and she said, "He asked for my blessing." Sarah looked at her mother. "I gave it," Eleanor said. And then he said, She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "He said he intended to make sure you knew every day that you were chosen." Those exact words. She looked at her daughter. "I should have said that to you, years ago. I should have made sure you knew." Sarah's chest did something complicated. "Mama." "Go," Eleanor said. "He's waiting." She went. Jacob was standing in the front room with his hat in his hands, and when she came through the door, he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the steady, assessing calm, not the practical directness, but something underneath all of that. The thing, the calm and the directness, were built on top of the bedrock thing that she had been trying to see for 3 weeks and was only now allowed to see clearly. He looked briefly like a man who was not certain, like a man who was standing at the edge of something important and knew it. "Sarah," he said. "Jacob," she said. He turned his hat once in his hands. "I told you I couldn't promise love," he said. "When I came to the kitchen that first morning, I said I could promise respect and partnership." "You did." "I was wrong," he said. "Not about the respect, not about the partnership, but about the love." He looked at her steadily with the accuracy he gave everything. "I don't know when it happened. I know it was somewhere between the fence posts and the ledger and you looking Garrett Briggs in the eye and telling him you'd read the dissolution clause." He paused. "I love you, Sarah. That was not in my original calculation, and I want you to know I'm aware that's—" He almost smiled. Unusual as a thing to say in a proposal. She felt something crack open in her chest that had been sealed for so long she had forgotten it was there. Not painfully. The way ground cracks in the thaw necessarily toward something. "It's honest," she said. "It is. You're asking me to marry you." "I am." She looked at him. She looked at the man who had come to her family's kitchen on a Thursday morning looking for a business arrangement and had stayed for something neither of them had planned, for who had come back Tuesday and Tuesday again, with maps and data and one word good pressed into the base of a stone-packed fence post, who had sat across from Garrett Briggs without performing anything, and gone home without requiring acknowledgement, who had asked her mother's blessing with the words he intended to make sure you knew every day that you were chosen. She had been chosen. She had been chosen by a man who knew exactly what she was and had come back again and again to know it better. "Yes," she said. Just that. Just the one word, the way she did things that mattered. Clean and direct and without reservation. Something shifted in Jacob Thornton's face that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not a dramatic change, not the kind of thing that would be visible across a room, but up close. The way she was standing, she could see it. The release of something held. The arrival of something expected, but still when it came more than expected. He crossed the room. He took her hands in both of his. Her flower, rough, work-marked, capable hands, and he held them the way you hold something you intend to keep. "We'll be married before the Briggs deadline," he said. "Not because of the deadline, but because I don't want to wait." "Neither do I," she said. He looked at her hands for a moment, then at her face. "I need to say something else." "Say it." "The first morning. The kitchen window. I watched you working, and I thought that woman knows how to survive. And I thought I wanted that. The survival. The partnership." He met her eyes. "I didn't know that what I actually wanted was you. I want you to know I know the difference now." She looked at him for a moment. "Jacob," she said. "Yes." "Stop talking and go tell Ruth." He almost laughed. It was the closest she had seen him come to it, and it was unexpected and warm and entirely his. He pressed her hands, once released them, put on his hat, and went to the porch. Sarah stood in the front room and breathed. Just breathed. Let the reality of the last 3 minutes settle into the rest of her, the way water settles into dry ground, slowly, thoroughly changing the composition of things permanently. Outside, she heard Ruth Connolly say, with the exact tone of a woman who has known for 3 weeks and is finally allowed to say so, well, it's about time. The next 4 days moved faster than any 4 days Sarah could remember. There was the matter of the proposal, which Lily heard that evening, with a face that was complicated. Not unkind, but complicated in the way of a woman who had genuinely tried to make peace with the situation and found that making peace and being at peace were different operations. She hugged Sarah once briefly, and she said, "I'm glad it's you." And Sarah heard everything underneath that sentence, and said nothing, because some things are received rather than answered. There was the matter of Alderman Briggs's response to the counterproposal, which arrived Monday as promised, and which said in the measured language of a businessman who had been out-argued and knew it, that he was willing to discuss the Hartwells' counterterms with modifications, and that Garrett would come in person Wednesday to finalize the structure. And there was the traveling preacher. He arrived Monday evening, an unscheduled, unannounced, entirely unexpected event, the kind of thing that happened in the territory with the frequency of weather. He was an old man named Brother Caleb, who traveled a circuit through Wyoming and was known, Ruth said, when she heard, as a man of complete integrity, who had been performing marriages and baptisms on the frontier for 30 years. He was staying one night, moving west at first light. Jacob came Monday evening when he had heard from Clem's driver, the information having moved in the way frontier information moved, which was faster than horses, and he stood in the Hartwell front room with his hat in his hands, and he looked at Sarah and said, "I know this is not how we planned it." "We didn't plan it," she said. "I know. But if you want to wait." "Do you want to wait?" she said. He looked at her. No. She looked at her mother. Eleanor was standing in the doorway with an expression that had traveled a very long way in 4 weeks, and had arrived somewhere it had never expected to be. Looking at her older daughter, her overlooked daughter, the one she had pushed behind curtains and managed around and failed to see, standing in the front room, about to be married to a good man who had chosen her on purpose and kept choosing her every single day. "Mama," Sarah said. "I'll get your grandmother's dress," Eleanor said, and went before anyone could see her face. They married that evening under the cottonwood at the east edge of the property, with Brother Caleb officiating, and the spring light going gold and thin across the grass. Eleanor stood on Sarah's left. Ruth Connolly stood on Jacob's right. Lily stood slightly apart with her hands folded and her face composed, and something in her eyes that was not happiness, but was not bitterness either, was something in between. Something that had not found its name, yet, that she was holding with a quietness that Sarah thought, watching her across the small distance of the ceremony, was the beginning of a kind of dignity that was all Lily's own. The dress was her grandmother's, let out, taken in, adjusted in the 20 minutes Eleanor had to work with it, fitting imperfectly and exactly right. She was aware of Jacob's eyes on her when she came out, and she was aware of what she must look like, the birthmark, the limp, the imperfect dress on an imperfect woman, under a cottonwood tree, with the Briggs deadline still counting, and the post still struggling, and 3 miles of fence still needing work. And she was aware of the look on Jacob Thornton's face, which was the same look she had finally been allowed to see on Sunday, the bedrock thing, the thing underneath all the practical and the steady and the certain. A man seeing the woman he had chosen, and knowing he had chosen correctly. Without reservation, without qualification. Brother Caleb spoke. They answered when they were supposed to answer. The words were the old words worn smooth by use, and they meant every syllable in the way of people who are not making promises lightly, because they have both seen what happens when promises are made lightly. When it was done, Ruth Connolly applauded. Eleanor made a sound that she converted at the last moment into something composed. Brother Caleb shook Jacob's hand and said, "Take care of her." And Jacob said, "I will." In the same voice, he said everything like he meant it, because he did. And then Lily did something Sarah had not expected. She walked forward, and she took Sarah's hands, and she looked at her sister, looked at her fully, without the management or the performance, or the careful composure, and she said in a voice that was just for the two of them, "You deserve this. I need you to know that I know you deserve this." Sarah felt the thing in her chest crack open a second time. "Lily?" "Don't," Lily said. "Just let me say it." She squeezed her hands once. "I love you, and I'm going to figure out the rest." "I know you will," Sarah said. "I'll be here while you do." Lily released her hands and stepped back, and the composure was back in place, but different now. Not the brittle managed composure of the past 4 weeks, but something with more foundation under it. Something she had chosen rather than performed. That evening, after Brother Caleb had gone, and Ruth Connolly had ridden north, and Eleanor had gone inside, and Lily had gone to bed, Sarah and Jacob sat on the porch of the Hartwell trading post in the cooling evening air, and looked at the yard, and the fence line, and the road going north. "Wednesday," Sarah said. "Garrett Briggs," Jacob said. "Yes." "You'll handle it." "We'll handle it," she said. It was the first time she had said "we" to him about something real, something that mattered, and she felt him register it, the same way she had felt him register his name in her mouth the first time, barely just a change in quality, just the slight shift of a man receiving something he had been waiting for. "We'll handle it," he agreed. She looked at the road going north, the road he had ridden in on 4 weeks ago. A man looking for a business arrangement who had looked through a kitchen window and changed his mind. She thought about the ledger and the debt and the 90 days now shrinking to something more manageable. She thought about the 3 miles of fence and the cabin with the sinking porch. She thought about all the work that was still ahead, all the problems still unsolved, all the mornings that would require getting up before the sun and doing what needed doing because it needed doing. She was not afraid of any of it. She had never been afraid of the work. The work was the one thing that had never failed her, the one constant in a life that had otherwise been arranged around her absence rather than her presence. She had built herself on the work bone deep, and she would keep building on it. Only now, for the first time in her life, she would not be building alone. "Jacob," she said. "Yes." "The porch post on the cabin." She looked at him sidelong. "When we get there. I want to fix it first." He looked at her. And this time the thing that had been almost a smile on Sunday actually arrived quiet, real his, and he said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." Garrett Briggs arrived Wednesday at 10 in the morning, and he arrived differently than before. The first 2 times he had come with the ease of a man who believed the situation gave him the upper hand. This time he came with something more careful in his bearing, a contained, deliberate quality, like a man who has been given new information and is still deciding what to do with it. He dismounted in the yard, and he looked at the post, and he looked at the new inventory list on the storeroom door, and then he looked at Sarah, who was standing on the porch waiting for him, and he said, "I heard you were married Monday evening." "I was," Sarah said. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression that he controlled quickly and well, but not quite quickly enough. "Congratulations," he said. The word was entirely even. She could not tell whether it cost him anything. "Thank you," she said. "Come inside. Jacob is already at the table." Garrett's eyes moved to the door, and then back to her, and she saw the recalculation happen in real time, the full reset of whatever he had been carrying in his thinking about this negotiation, about this property, about the woman who ran it. He put on a different face. Not dishonest exactly, but repositioned. He went inside. Jacob was at the kitchen table with the counter-proposal documentation laid out in front of him, and Ruth Connolly sitting to his left, which was Ruth's way of making it clear, without saying anything, that she was a witness, and intended to remain one. Jacob stood when Garrett came in, and they shook hands with the mutual assessment of 2 men who are going to have to work out where they stand, and know it. "Mr. Thornton," Garrett said. "Mr. Briggs," Jacob said. They sat down. Sarah sat across from Garrett and laid her own copy of the counterproposal on the table, and the negotiation began. It took 2 hours. It was, Sarah thought afterward, the most focused 2 hours of sustained argument she had ever conducted, and she had spent a significant portion of her adult life conducting arguments with ledger numbers and supply chains and weather. Garrett Briggs was not a foolish man, and his father's modifications were not unreasonable. They were the modifications of a businessman who wanted more security than Sarah's proposal offered, while still maintaining the investment relationship. The back and forth was precise and occasionally tense, and entirely without the performance of either party trying to seem more powerful than they were. At the end of the first hour, Garrett said, "The interest rate you're proposing is below market." "The repayment timeline is shorter than market," Sarah said. "And the operational projections I've shown you are conservative. You'll return your principal in 30 months at this rate, which is 14 months faster than your father's majority partner offer would have produced." Garrett looked at the numbers. He looked at them with the genuine attention of a man who was checking her math rather than her authority, and when he looked up, he did not argue the figure because the figure was correct. "The supply route," he said. "The Owl Creek contacts. How secure is that?" "I have 3 names and written interest from 2 of them," Jacob said. "The third is a matter of price negotiation that Sarah will handle." Garrett looked at Jacob. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the document. He picked up a pencil and made a notation. "The dissolution clause," he said. "As written, you retain full authority over any decision to sell or restructure. My father won't accept that without a right of first refusal." Sarah looked at Jacob. Jacob looked at Sarah. 3 seconds of something that was not a conversation, but was faster than a conversation, the kind of communication that belongs to people who know each other well enough to think together. "Right of first refusal at fair market value assessed by an independent party," Sarah said. "Not at his proposed price. Market value." Garrett made another notation. "That's acceptable." At the end of the second hour, they had something that looked like an agreement. Not the agreement Alderman Briggs had sent his son to secure, and not precisely the counter-proposal Sarah had written, but the territory between those 2 things, where actual agreements live the place where two parties, who both have real interests, find the structure that serves both. Garrett looked at the final terms for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. "You should have been doing this professionally years ago," he said. She looked at him. "I've been doing this professionally for 3 years," she said. No one was paying attention. He held her gaze. "I am paying attention now," he said. Not with the recalculating look of the earlier visits. With something simpler. With the direct acknowledgement of a man who has been out-negotiated and is honest enough to say so without dressing it differently. "My father will ratify this. I'll tell him it's the best arrangement available, and that pursuing anything else would cost him more than it gained him." "Is that what you believe?" Jacob said. "It's what the numbers say," Garrett said. "And my father listens to numbers." He stood. He gathered his copies of the documents. He looked at Sarah one final time, the full direct look that had nothing left in it of the automatic dismissal, nothing of the recalculation, nothing of whatever else he had been carrying through the earlier visits, just accurate recognition. "Mrs. Thornton," he said. The name deliberate, the use of it deliberate. "Mr. Briggs," she said. He left. Ruth Connolly waited until the sound of his horse had faded entirely, and then she said, "That went better than it had any right to go." "It went the way the numbers said it would go," Sarah said. "If you do the work correctly, the numbers hold." Jacob looked at her across the table. He looked at her with the bedrock thing fully visible, not contained this time, not managed for the appropriate setting. Just there. "Yes," he said. "They do." They moved to the cabin the following week. Sarah had known the cabin was small. She had seen it assessed. It told him exactly what it needed. Knowing a thing and living inside it were two different operations, and she discovered this again on the first morning when she woke up in a space that was not the Hartwell house and lay still in the dark and listened to the specific quality of mountain silence, deeper than frontier silence, older with a weight to it that pressed against the windows and the walls and asked what you were made of. She was made of enough. She had always been made of enough. She got up before the sun. She started the fire. She assessed the cabin with the fresh eyes of a woman who now lived in it, rather than visited it, identifying 3 things that needed immediate attention, and 2 that could wait until spring was further along. She started a list. Jacob found her at the work table with the list. When he came out of the sleeping room, and he looked at the list, and then at her, and he said, "How long have you been up?" "Since 4. "It's 5:30. "I know." He looked at the list. He looked at her. He sat down across from her and said, "Read me the immediate ones." She read him the immediate ones. He listened. He asked 2 questions. She answered them. They had coffee and divided the work between them with the same no-wasted motion efficiency they brought to every problem. And by the time the sun was fully up, they were already into the first task, and the cabin was already becoming incrementally the thing it needed to be. This was how the weeks went. Not romantically, not in the way of stories, not with the architecture of feeling that people described when they talked about love, the grand gestures, and the piercing moments. It was quieter than that, and more real than that. It was 2 people who were good at work working together and learning each other in the process, with the accumulated daily intimacy of shared difficulty. The morning arguments about which fence section to prioritize, the evening negotiations about the post's inventory decisions, the particular knowledge of how the other person moved through problems that you only get by watching someone move through problems every day for weeks. She learned that he could not leave a crooked thing alone, a tilted shelf, an uneven post, a calculation that didn't close cleanly. He would come back to it in the middle of something else, driven by the same internal standard she recognized because she had the same one. She learned that he was slower to trust new information than she was, but deeper in his trust once it was established, and that this was not stubbornness, but a different kind of rigor. She learned that he was funny quietly in the dry way of a man who had spent years in the mountains with only his own company, and had developed an interior sense of humor that came out sideways and infrequently, and was all the funnier for it. He learned her rhythms in the way of a man paying genuine attention, which days the hip was worse, what it meant when she went quiet in a particular way versus another way, the difference between the thinking quiet and the hurting quiet and the I have decided something quiet. He never once asked her directly about the hip. He simply adjusted the day's work in ways that weren't visible as adjustment that looked like practical decisions rather than accommodation, and she was grateful for this beyond what she knew how to say, which was a lot. She didn't say it. She showed it the same way he showed things, by the quality of her presence, by the specific attention she gave to the things he cared about, by the work itself, which was its own language between people who had built their lives on it. 6 weeks into the marriage, a letter came from Eleanor. The Post was doing better. The Briggs investment had cleared the debt and restocked the inventory, and the Owl Creek supply route that Jacob had sourced was already moving product through the Hartwell Post at a rate that had the first month's numbers sitting above the projections Sarah had given Garrett. Eleanor wrote this with the characteristic Hartwell restraint, 3 sentences on the numbers, 1 sentence on how she was feeling about them, which was the highest ratio of feeling to fact Eleanor had ever managed in written communication. Then she wrote about Lily. Lily had taken on the management of the Post's customer accounts, which she did with the precise interpersonal skill of a woman who had spent her whole life learning how people worked, and could now apply that skill to something that paid rather than something that just maintained her position. She was good at it, Eleanor wrote in a way that surprised everyone, but apparently Lily herself, who seemed to have been waiting for a long time for someone to hand her something real to do. Sarah read this letter on the porch of the mountain cabin in the late spring light, and felt something settle in her chest that had been uncertain since the evening Lily had said, "I'm going to figure out the rest." "She's figured it out," Sarah said to no one, or to Jacob, who was close enough to hear. "What did she find?" Jacob said from where he was working on the porch post, the stone sleeve she had recommended finally being installed 2 weeks after she had recommended it. "Herself," Sarah said. "I think she found herself." He looked up at her briefly. "Good," he said, and went back to the post, and that was all it needed to be. Then summer came, and with it the thing Sarah had not expected to happen so soon. She knew before she told him. She had known for 10 days with the specific internal certainty of a woman who has been paying careful attention to her own body for 26 years, and can read it the way she reads a ledger accurately, without sentiment, without wishful misinterpretation. She was not frightened exactly. She was the way she was before any large thing, still and focused and running the calculations of what this meant and what it required and whether she was equal to it. She told him on a Tuesday evening after dinner, sitting on the porch, that no longer sagged because the post was now properly set with a stone sleeve and packed base. She told him the same way she told him everything directly, without softening, without performance. "I'm going to have a baby," she said. Jacob Thornton went completely still. She watched him carefully, because she always watched carefully, and she needed to know, needed to see the real response. The first response, before he organized it into something presentable. What she saw was this. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, closed once into fists, and then opened slowly. His jaw tightened. His eyes closed for 3 seconds. When they opened, they were different than before. Something had come to the surface that was usually below it, the bedrock thing again, but larger. The way the same stratum looks different when you see it at scale. He put his face in his hands. Not in distress. In the specific way of a man who has been given something that is too large for his normal management systems, and needs a moment to find the ones capable of holding it. Sarah sat beside him and did not say anything and did not touch him and gave him the moment he needed. When he looked up, his face was, she did not have a complete word for it, open, stripped of every layer of the practical and the steady and the certain, all the way down to something that was not any of those things, but was what those things were built to protect. He looked at her. "Sarah," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you?" He stopped. He looked at her with the specific attention she now recognized as his version of care, not soft, not hovering, not the performed gentleness of a man who thinks a woman is fragile, but the focused, accurate attention of a man who needs to know the true answer, because the true answer is what he is going to act on. "Are you all right?" "I'm healthy," she said. "I'm calculating what we need to do differently in the next 6 months." She paused. "And She looked at the mountains. She let herself feel it fully without managing it into something smaller. "I'm glad," she said. "That's the real answer. I'm glad." He reached out and took her hand. Not performatively. Not to comfort or reassure. Just to hold it the way you hold something you intend to keep the same way as the day they were married. He held her hand, and they sat on the porch in the summer evening air, and the mountains did what the mountains did. They stayed unchanged and enormous, and entirely indifferent to human feeling, which was somehow not comforting, but steadying. The scale of them made the scale of everything else correct. "Jacob," she said. "Yes." "You're going to need to finish the back room extension before winter." He looked at her. He almost laughed again, the same as the day she married him, the same quiet, real thing. "Yes," he said. "I am." He started the extension the following week. Summer moved forward, and Sarah moved through it with the same early morning discipline she had always moved through everything, adjusting the work rather than stopping it, recalibrating the physical demands against what her body required. Jacob watched this without comment and without the interference of a man who had decided her pregnancy was an incapacity. He watched it the way he watched her manage everything with attention and respect, and the occasional precise practical suggestion that was not advice, but information offered and received as information acted on or set aside based on her own assessment. They fought for the first time in August. It was about the Owl Creek negotiation. The third contact, the one that was still unresolved, and Sarah's plan to ride out and handle it personally, which Jacob thought was unnecessary, and which she thought he thought because of the pregnancy, and said so directly, and he said that was not the reason, and she said then what was the reason, and he said the terms she was proposing were too favorable to the other party, and she said she had looked at the numbers and she knew what the market would bear, and he said he had information about the other party that she didn't have, and she said, "Then tell me the information instead of arguing about the plan." He told her the information. She looked at it. She adjusted the terms. She said, "You should have said that first instead of arguing about the plan. You should have asked if I had information instead of assuming the objection was about your judgment." She looked at him. He looked at her. The air between them had the charged, specific quality of two people who have just said something accurate and are deciding whether to be right about it or to be together about it. "You're right," she said. "So are you," he said. She rode out to the Owl Creek negotiation the following week with the adjusted terms and came back with a signed agreement that was better than her original proposal because of his information and better than his preferred approach because of her negotiation. They were both right about it. They were both together about it. That, she thought, was what partnership actually looked like when it was working. Not one person being right and one person being wrong, but two people being right about different things and building something better out of the combination. Fall came in hard that year, earlier than expected. Colder than forecast, with the specific brutal certainty of a Wyoming mountain winter that does not wait for anyone to be ready. Sarah had been ready for 6 weeks. The backroom extension was finished. The winter stores were in. The livestock was secured. The fence lines had been checked and reinforced. She had done these things with the organized, methodical efficiency of a woman who had been preparing for winters her whole life, and who now had double the reason to prepare correctly. She was 7 months along when the first real cold arrived, and the cold arrived the same week as another letter. This one not from Eleanor. It was from Alderman Briggs himself, not Garrett Alderman in his own handwriting. A man who did not write personal letters except when the matter was personal enough to require it. He was writing to inform her that the Hartwell Post's first full quarter under the new arrangement had exceeded his projections by 18%, and that he intended to bring this to the attention of 3 business associates in Casper who were looking for reliable investment in the territory's supply infrastructure. He was recommending the Hartwell Post as an operational model. He wanted to know, he wrote, whether she would be interested in advising on 2 similar situations that he was aware of for a consulting fee. Sarah read this letter twice. She read it in the way she read the fence post joints, pressing on it, looking for weakness, checking whether it held. It held. It was exactly what it appeared to be. Alderman Briggs, who had sent his son to deliver a deadline and take a property, was now asking the woman who had stopped him from taking it to teach other operations how to run themselves. She set the letter on the table. Jacob was across the room, and he had been watching her read in the way he watched everything with full attention, without intrusion. "Well," he said. "Alderman Briggs wants to pay me to advise other posts," she said. Jacob was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you want to do? Not what do you think? Not what should we do? What do you want?" She had stopped being surprised by the specific form of his respect, which never dressed itself as consulting, but was always underneath about what she actually chose. She had stopped being surprised, but she had not stopped being grateful, and she thought she probably never would. "I want to think about it," she said. "After the winter. After—" She gestured briefly at herself, and he understood the gesture without requiring elaboration. "After," he agreed. Winter settled over the mountain cabin like a held breath, enormous white, pressing the world down into its essential elements. And in that pressing in the specific crucible of a Wyoming mountain winter, with 2 feet of snow on the ground and the nearest neighbor 2 miles away, something happened between Sarah and Jacob Thornton that had been building since the kitchen window and the fence post and the first Thursday, and the day she said yes, and every day after. They became fully and without remainder each other's people, not in the grand gesture way, in the way of the early morning fire and the shared evening and the argument that got resolved because both parties cared more about being right together than being right alone. In the way of 2 people whose lives had braided themselves together past the point of separation, not by circumstance, but by repeated daily choice, each day chosen again. The baby came in January. He came fast and difficult, and in the early hours of the morning, when the snow was still dark outside, and the wind was pressing against the cabin walls, and Sarah was not frightened, but she was, for the first and only time in her life, grateful bone deep in a way that had no calculation in it and no management to not be doing this alone. Ruth Connolly had come 3 days before reading the approach of it with the experience of a woman who had seen many arrivals, and she was there and capable and entirely in her element. Jacob was there too. He was there in the way he was everything present, functional, steady. Not hovering, not panicking, not performing the concerned husband in a way that centered his feelings over what was actually needed. He was there, the way a load-bearing wall is there. You rely on it, and it holds. And you don't have to think about whether it's going to hold, because it does every time, without announcement. When it was over, and Ruth laid the baby in Sarah's arms, Jacob sat beside her on the bed, and he looked at the baby and then at Sarah. And the open, stripped bedrock thing was on his face again. Larger than it had been when she told him. Larger than it had been at the wedding. Larger than she had seen it be, because he had not known how much larger it could get, and apparently neither had she. He put his forehead against her temple. Just that. Just the contact of it, the weight of his presence against her, and he said nothing for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "You're all right." "I'm all right," she said. "He's perfect," she said. "He's perfect, Jacob." He looked at the baby. He reached out one hand and touched the baby's face with 2 fingers, the same careful pressing attention he gave to fence post joints and ledger numbers and everything else he needed to understand was real. The baby was real. His face said so in the way his face said the things that mattered, without announcement, without performance, just the full truth of it, visible if you were close enough and paying attention. She was close enough. She was paying attention. "What do we call him?" Jacob said. Sarah looked at her son. She thought about everything that had led to this room this morning, this child in her arms. The kitchen window and the flower on her hands, and the man who had looked through a curtain at the wrong sister and asked for her name. The fence posts packed with stone, the ledger in the dark, the letter from Alderman Briggs with its 90 days, the cottonwood tree and her grandmother's imperfect dress, and Lily's hands squeezing hers. "Caleb," she said, "for the preacher who married us." Jacob nodded once, the small, precise nod that was his whole vocabulary for things he might have said at greater length. "Caleb," he said. "Good." Spring came again, the way it always came, without ceremony, without asking whether you were ready, just arriving because it was time. The snow went, the ground softened. The mountains that had pressed close all winter stepped back slightly and let the sky come in wider, and the light returned in that particular spring way, thin and clean, and entirely without sentiment. Sarah stood on the porch of the mountain cabin, the porch with the properly set post, the stone sleeve and packed base that she had fixed the first week, the porch that no longer sagged with Caleb against her chest, and the spring air coming off the mountains, and Jacob somewhere behind her in the yard, doing something with the fence line that she would assess when she had a moment. Eleanor had come for 2 weeks in February. She had held her grandson and said nothing for a long time, and what she eventually said was not about the baby, but about Sarah, about all of it. The whole of it compressed into 4 words that cost her more than most people's speeches. "I see you now." And Sarah had looked at her mother and said, "I know you do." And that had been enough, because it was true, and it was late, and it was still worth saying. Lily had come in March. She had stood on this same porch with the mountain light on her face, and she had looked at the cabin and the fence line and the operation, and she had said, "You built something." Not with surprise, with recognition, with the honesty of a woman who had done her own building in the months since the wedding and knew what it looked like from the inside. Sarah had said, "So did you." And Lily had looked at her with that fine-lined expression that was finding slowly and in its own time something better than peace, something that was actually hers. The post continued to grow. The Owl Creek route became reliable. The consulting arrangement with Alderman Briggs became over the following year something more substantial than a fee. It became a recognized thing. A woman in the Wyoming Territory who understood supply and capital and operation in a way that solved problems men had not been able to solve, and who was paid accordingly for the solving. Garrett Briggs came twice more on business, and both times he was entirely professional and entirely without the earlier layers. And both times Jacob shook his hand in the yard with the ease of men who have found their positions relative to each other and made their peace with them. And on a Tuesday morning in the second spring, 2 years from the morning, Jacob Thornton had looked through a kitchen window and asked, "Who is that woman?" Sarah Hartwell. Thornton stood on the porch of the mountain cabin with her son on her hip, and the spring air in her lungs, and the life she had built around her, visible in every direction in the fence line, and the stored timber, and the cabin with its sound walls and proper joinery, and the road going down toward the trading post that was no longer failing. Jacob came out of the cabin with his hat in his hands, and he stopped beside her and looked at what she was looking at and said, "What are you thinking?" She had been thinking about the woman who had stood behind a kitchen curtain 2 springs ago with flour on her hands and no expectation of being seen. She had been thinking about the specific nature of being chosen, not rescued, not compensated for, not managed or accommodated, but chosen plainly and on purpose, and every day again, by a man who knew exactly what he was choosing. She had been thinking about what it meant to have been invisible for so long, and then to be seen, not to become something different, not to be transformed by love into a better or more valuable version of herself, but to be seen as what she had always been, and to have that be enough. To have that be, in fact, the very thing. She looked at Jacob. He looked at her with the bedrock thing as present as it always was, constant, unperforming, chosen. "I'm thinking," she said, "that the north fence section needs checking before the ground gets any softer." He put on his hat. "After breakfast," he said. "After breakfast," she agreed. And Sarah Hartwell. Thornton, the woman everyone had overlooked and no one had expected, and one good man had chosen on a Thursday morning because he looked through a kitchen window and saw not a flaw or a deficit or a consolation prize, but a woman who knew how to survive. She handed her son to his father and went inside to make breakfast. She had always been worth choosing. The world had simply needed one person with the clarity to see it and the courage to say so out loud for that truth to become the life she was already built to live.